As you all are aware, today the discussion topic is FPC, that is Fair Practice Code. Now, here also the name is very much explanatory. Fair Practice Code. Ki bhai, keep your practices fair. That's the entire culmination or the summary of this regulation. Now, to put this regulations up, these particular regulations, I would say, in a generic sense, we can say they are like a MABAP clause. So what do I mean by MABAP clause? They are like good advices that a regulator gives, like सारे disclosure सही से करना, गलत बातें मत करना, customer के साथ बुरा व्यवहार मत करना. So these kind of clauses, like they are like more like a advisory given by some elder to the child. These kind of advisories, when you talk about, these are called fair practice code. So when I talk about these are very generic statements. Okay, so if anyone of you have read it, so as I mentioned, but pre-read kar lena FPC would be a better approach. So if you have read the regulations, you would have found such kind of clauses only. I'll just present them also once, a summary of them. Huh. So these kind of clauses, like when you're giving a loan application form, keep them in a vernacular language, or acknowledgement of receipt provide karna. When you're disclosing penal letters, keep them in bold. So these are like very given statements that you have to comply with. There is not much conceptual discussion that is required over here. So what I suggest is you have these particular clauses in front of you as well. You can read the FPC as well. Where you find any difficulties, you can let me know and we can discuss them on further, because I do not find any point in discussing plainly given points that are prescribed over there. This you can do, this you cannot do. Just one point to notice over here is it's a very practical thing. There is any NBFC that does not have customer interface does not have to comply with fair practice code. Like so fair practice code, as I mentioned, are the code for fair practices with the customer. So if I do not have customer, fair practice code is not applicable. But here the term customer interface becomes crucial, because this customer interface is nowhere defined. There is no definition as such what is meant by customer interface. So in general sense, what we mean is when we are dealing with any other person outside the company, we usually take it as customer interface. So to take an example, NBFC that is purely into investment of funds into stock markets or in any other securities, we can say they do not have any customer interface. What they are doing is a investment activity, just go and invest into securities of the other issuers, and that's what their business is. So they do not have any customer interface. Whereas an NBFC which is into lending would very naturally have a customer interface. But here a little bit tricky question arises. What happens when I give loans to my group companies? Now, if I make investment in group companies, it's very clear it's not a customer interface. But do I call a particular loan that I've given to a group company as a customer interface? What would be your all's view on this?
I would call it as a customer interface because
Why?
just because it's a company, you don't. I'm not in the. I don't have a view that just because it's a company, it will not be considered as a customer. It is still a customer. Matlab, our view, our perception of a customer is an individual, right? But
No,
just
no,
because
I'm
it's a
not
company,
talking about a company. See, if I'm lending to a company, it's still a customer. Completely agreed. But what if it's a group company?
Still, we may call it as a customer interface. Matlab, in cases where the source of funds, if the source of funds through which we are giving the loan, if that is raised from the public, so in that case, will it be called customer interface?
Seriously, this argument comes when we are talking about public funds. So if my group company has raised public fund and made an equity investment in me, or equity investment would be counted in public funds. Sorry, over here. If my group company has raised any public fund and then given me debt, at that time I sometimes argue that whether this will be considered as public fund or not, because the funds that I've gotten is not from public but my group company only. So that argument applies over there actually. When I talk about customer interface, it's actually I'm talking about my asset side. So it's not from where I've raised the money. So that won't be of much relevance here, where my group company is bringing in money. It's like when I'm dealing with those group companies, do I consider them as a customer? Is my group company my customer? That's how I put up a question. So as I would say, if I have to take a call, I would not have a yes or no answer to it. Okay. It has to be a case-to-case analysis. I would be more, on a personal level, be more inclined towards treating this as a customer interface where I'm giving out loans, because just because I'm related to someone or I have a closeness to someone should not be a premise of saying that it's not my customer, cannot be my customer, is or not availing my services. That's what my argument is. Someone can have a counter argument because I do not have any regulatory backing to it. But if someone has a counter argument, we can openly discuss on that. That is what my view I put forward. So that is what is a fair practice code. First, only applicable to the customer. NBFC is a customer interface. The very first compliance to be done is you have to have a policy setup approved by board. That policy would guide all the company in their operations. That's a major point. Other all are usually okay. Prepayment penalty is a crucial point over here. That prepayment penalty can not be charged to individuals for loans other than business. Okay, so here is the point. So when I discuss about prepayment penalty, if it's a fixed rate interest loan, I can charge a prepayment penalty. If it's a floating interest rate loan to non-individual, I can charge the prepayment penalty. If it's a floating interest rate loan to individual for business, then also I can charge prepayment penalty. But if I am offering a floating interest rate loan to individual for purpose other than business, it's there where I'm restricted from charging a prepayment penalty. That's a very important term, because this becomes a decision point for some of the NBFCs to whether go for a floating rate or a fixed rate. I hope you're clear what is meant by a floating and a fixed rate. If anyone's not clear, I can elaborate further on that as well. Okay, so as you guys are clear on that, that are the major compliances that I see over here. One more point that comes in a lot of discussion is that only annualized rate should be published. Now, what is meant by annualized rate? When I talk about the annualized rate, it is to be the actual rate that the customer has to pay out. In a financial term, I call it IRR, internal rate of return. So the IRR, or the actual cost that the borrower has to pay, is to be disclosed. That's the annualized rate that I have to give. In the subsequent session, maybe the very next session as well, we will discuss about digital lending guidelines. So when we'll discuss about digital lending guidelines now, there we will also discuss this particular annualized rate all concept. That there is a term called APR, annualized percentage rate. So that is an even broader term over there. So even that requires to be disclosed in a digital lending case. But digital lending it's a big concept. We'll discuss in the subsequent section. So when we discuss digital lending guideline also, it would be more around FPC practices only, prudential norms and practices only. So I think I will just keep it as the next session. So there we will discuss this term in more detail. Okay, apart from that, I don't think there are any points to be discussed in the fair practice code. If anyone has any particular point to discuss, can ask me.
So this annualized rate, I had a question. Annualized rate is encompassing every rate, or it's like only the rate of interest, like every cost which borrower has to pay, or it's only the rate of interest, consists of only the rate of interest?
If I talk about purely from what's given under the master direction or the fair practice code, it only talks about annualized rate of interest. So it only talks about interest rate that the customer has to pay. Different other charges that the customer has to pay is to be properly disclosed. Okay, and the terms have to be clearly provided. That's the requirement. But when I talk about the digital lending, that I talked about APR, that APR is actually an all-inclusive rate. Over there is a formula prescribed over there, and there other charges and all that also charged are included. Okay.
I have a question. I was going through the fair practice code and I came across the word ombudsman. Could you elaborate, please?
Yes, the very next discussion will be ombudsman. So I will elaborate on that. Anything else? How we should move on? Okay, so now the part of the fair practice code that has the most practical implications, or where we face the most issues or queries around is the grievance redressal and the ombudsman. Okay, so first of all, grievance redressal. So very common when you deal with NBFCs in the financial sector. I've multiple times mentioned that the financial sector is very crucial. At the same time, we also need to protect the customers. So protecting the customer rights also becomes a important task of the regulator. So the regulator has prescribed some of the systems or processes in place to ensure that the customer rights are not hindered. Okay. So, for NBFCs and a lending institution. Now, I will give you to put this up in context. What happens is when a person needs money now, he will agree to any condition that you put forward to him. So when you talk about lending to some of the underserved classes, you will observe that they might even agree to an exorbitant interest rate when they need money, because they might be in very much need. That is common for any person. If he's in need of money, making him agreeable to your terms is very easy. Hence, the vulnerability of the customers can be easily exploited by the financial sector entity, and they very well know this. So to avoid that, RBI has put in place some systems so that if the customer faces some issues or query, he is able to address those. So when I discuss about customer safeguarding, so the very first step available over here is the grievance redressal officer. Now, every NBFC, what they have to do is they have to appoint a grievance redressal officer. What does this grievance redressal officer does is if there is any complaint, this grievance redressal, you need to make the complaint to this. First, go and make your complaint to the grievance redressal officer. The information on contact details of the grievance redressal officer would be available in your loan documents as well as on the website of the company. That's a compliance requirement. Okay. Whenever the grievance redressal officer receives a complaint, he has an obligation to, or he has to make the effort to resolve those complaints within 1 month or 30 days period. If he's unable to resolve this complaint, then you have a right, or the customer can approach the RBI ombudsman. Now, what's an ombudsman? So generally, when we talk about ombudsman, these are like, how can I put it? Village elders. So someone like a village elder who sits and gives or resolves, help you resolve the dispute. That you can relate ombudsman to someone like that.
The sarpanch type.
Kind of. Yes. So when I talk about RBI ombudsman, so RBI has a person sitting as an ombudsman who would help you resolve this complaint. So previously we had a system where every regional office of the RBI or different offices had different ombudsmen who operated in their areas. But now that has been done away with, and RBI has introduced an integrated ombudsman scheme under which there is a central system where you file a complaint online. So there's a complaints portal by RBI. Over there, you can go and file your complaint. However, not all the NBFCs and the financial sector entities are covered by the integrated ombudsman scheme. NBFCs with asset size more than 100 crores, payment system entities, and banks. These are covered by the integrated ombudsman scheme. So if you approach the GRO, if GRO does not resolve your complaint, you approach the ombudsman. That is the RBI official that I'm talking about. This RBI official, how do you approach them? It's a online portal. You can go and register your complaint over there. However, if you're not falling under this eligibility criteria, that is, if you're a housing finance company or you're a NBFC with asset size less than 100 crores, what you have to do is there is a complaint redressal cell of RBI. And for housing finance company, it's complaint redressal cell of NHB. So you go to their complaint redressal cell and then you can make your complaint over there against that housing finance company. So most of you might be aware that NHB, National Housing Bank, previously used to regulate housing finance companies. Now it's being regulated by RBI. But however, the supervisory role, the regulatory role is played by the RBI. However, the supervisory role is still played by National Housing Bank. So under that supervisory role, the complaints against the housing finance companies are to be raised with complaint redressal cell of NHB. However, NBFCs asset size less than 100 crores also, there is a complaint redressal cell of RBI where you raise the complaints. That's for the integrated ombudsman. Now, what happens when you approach the ombudsman? So what happens is RBI would then send a mail to the nodal officer of the NBFC. Now, this nodal officer is different from the GRO. Generally, nodal officer would be someone senior to GRO. Okay, so there's a GRO whom you made a complaint. He did not resolve it within 30 days. You have a right to approach ombudsman. Ombudsman would, along with your complaint, pass on your details to the nodal officer who would reply to the RBI along with the details and try to resolve it. So first, there is an effort to make an amicable solution where both the ombudsman by its intermediation can make a settlement between the parties. If that doesn't work out, then ombudsman passes an award. Now, what is this award? Basically, ombudsman gives his decision, ki, okay, this is right or this is wrong, this is what you do. Of course, if you're not satisfied, there are appellate options available to you, but that's too much detail. I don't want to get into the basic, into this basic sessions. I don't want to get into that much detail. So the very thing is, ombudsman will pass an award that both the parties can comply with. That's how it works under the integrated ombudsman scheme. Here, the very point is the RBI's intervention makes this very effective. Because I will give you a very simple example. Go to a bank. If they are not doing something, they are, asking you to move around windows. Just once take the name of RBI ombudsman. If you don't do my job, I will approach the RBI ombudsman and then see how their attitude changes. It's very practical. Just go and do it with any NBFC and any bank. Because RBI's intervention, though it's a very simple that the complaint would go and the nodal officer is called upon. But see, ombudsman complaint sometimes becomes the basis for regulatory review as well. We have dealt with some of the NBFCs where what happened was they were continuously receiving complaints on the ombudsman relating to their fair practice code violations. So because someone was violating fair practice code, the customers were regularly approaching ombudsman. And this prompted RBI to start with the inspection of their entity, and that inspection then resulted in imposition of fine. So ombudsman actually becomes a crucial. So just by introducing RBI's intervention, so first we gave company a chance to resolve the complaint. If they're unable to do it, then bringing in RBI intervention, of course, helps over there. That's the first thing. I think that's the entire grievance addressal system that happens in an NBFC. Apart from that, for some of the larger NBFCs, RBI also introduced internal ombudsman scheme. Now, what is an internal ombudsman? So as the name suggests, it's an ombudsman that's internal to the company. So it's not an RBI ombudsman. It's a person who is an employee or officer of the company, okay, who acts as the ombudsman. But here you need to understand that the very concept of ombudsman is helpful when it's the RBI's intervention. So this internal ombudsman is not someone who deals with customers. His job is different. I will come to it. So who has to comply with internal ombudsman scheme? These are the NBFCs with asset size more than 5,000 crore. So once you cross the 5,000 crore limits, you have 6 months to appoint a internal ombudsman. Now, see this. Also, this particular schemes, I'm not getting into exact compliance requirements per se, but this internal ombudsman that you're appointing has also several checks and compliances to ensure that this particular post remains independent. So he has a direct reporting line to MD CEO. His remuneration is approved by the board. His removal or something is to be reported to RBI if I'm not wrong. So there are checks in place to ensure that this person remains independent. Okay. Now, what is the scope of work of internal ombudsman? As I said, he does not deal directly with the customer. He will never come face to face with the customer. So what would happen is when a complaint is received by the GRO, most of the, very practically speaking, most of the time the GRO would say that this complaint is not valid and we are rejecting it. So I will give you a simple example. You were charged exorbitant rate of interest rate, okay, or the selling officer or the salesman of the NBFC told you some other facts and sold you some another product or some other product and this did not disclose few charges to you. So over here, when you raise a complaint, grievance redressal officer will see your complaint. He will say all the particular information were given into the loan document. Hence, the complaint is not proper and he rejected it. Very simply, he can do that. So to avoid that, we have put up a one person ahead of it. So whenever the GRO, so what this internal ombudsman does is, if there is a GRO rejects a complaint, that complaint has to necessarily go to internal ombudsman for his review. So he will review whether this rejection of complaint is proper or not. Okay. If he finds that the rejection is proper, then it's okay. No issues with that. Nothing happens further. However, if he rejects, however, if he finds that the rejection was improper, he can ask the GRO to accept this complaint. But here also, it's not that the decision of the internal ombudsman is binding on the NBFC. NBFC can choose to reject the suggestion of the internal ombudsman. However, the rejection of these complaints are to be periodically filed with RBI. So how many suggestions of the internal ombudsman you have rejected, you need to file to RBI. So again, intervention of RBI comes in, and that gives them a lot of power. Step by step to again re-go through it. First, I raised a complaint with GRO. Either GRO accepts my complaint, that's fine. It goes through and he makes efforts to resolve it. If he doesn't accept my complaint, he goes for rejection. I can go to internal ombudsman. Internal ombudsman, either he's after review finds that my rejection was proper, we move ahead with rejecting the complaint. Of course, the customer then has the right to approach the internal ombudsman. Integrate the RBI ombudsman. He can then approach the RBI ombudsman. Internal ombudsman just an additional layer. However, if he finds that the decision of GRO for rejecting the complaint was not proper, he can then ask the GRO to accept those complaints. However, the management of the NBFC has the right to not accept the recommendation of the internal ombudsman, but those things are to be periodically filed to RBI. Apart from this, IO also does one more job where the complaints are not resolved within 3 weeks. IO is required to intervene in that and ensure that the complaints are then resolved. Now, the doubt would come that why would it be 3 weeks? So it's actually a timeline prescribed over there. Within 3 weeks, if it's not resolved, you actually have 30 days to resolve it. But till the 3 weeks, if it's not resolved, then internal ombudsman is required to intervene and then resolve. So only 2 jobs for IO. Complaints rejected by GRO is to be reviewed by him. Complaints not resolved in 3 weeks, he has to intervene. That's it. That's all the role of IO. And grievance redressal. So today we discussed fair practice code, basic around that, grievance redressal, and the ombudsman scheme, how that works around. As I mentioned, the following session, now we will discuss around digital lending. So that when we discuss about digital lending regulations, there are also an extension to these regulations. But I would have to first discuss in brief what are the digital lending, what are the common structures they work on, and then we will go into the specific guidelines around that. That's all for today from my side. Now